Good morning. As From the last month, we have started faculty lecture series covering the topics in recent advances in surgery, which will help students to write their answers from recent advances. So today we'll have Professor Ramanuj Mukherjee from RGK Medical College. He will discuss on penetrating injuries of the upper GI tract and its management. Dr. Ramanuj, we can start screen sharing.
Okay. Sir, can I be the co-host, because only host can share the meeting? Can you make me the host, please?
Co-host.
Yes, sir, I'll be starting in a minute. Okay. Sir, is the screen visible, sir?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. A very good morning to all. Number one is that I would like to thank Professor Makhulal Shah and the whole team of academia of the MR Mangur Hospital for this opportunity to come in front of you. With this, we'll be starting on a topic that is very close to my heart, that is trauma, and that also penetrating trauma to the upper GI tract. Now, those of you who are listening to this talk or this lecture, my name is Ramanuj Mukherjee. I work in RGK Medical College as Professor of Surgery, and greetings from the city of joy. In these depressing times, and probably this day should be coming up with a ray of hope, and particularly ray of hope for trauma patients, in which, ladies and gentlemen, the story started around in 1976. So before you gear up to write something, before you gear up to write everything, then what was important was in 1976, in a Sunday morning, a orthopedic surgeon, definitely like we as surgeons, the more we mature, we think about buying a scooter and then a car. And then when orthopedic surgeons become great practitioners, they buy a plane. And what happened was that an orthopedic surgeon by the name of James Steiner had his own plane and was returning to his house. And one morning, his plane crashed in the fields of a place called Nebraska in Central America. And much like that of the rest of the world, on a Sunday morning, he really had a difficult time to care for his 3 children. His wife was dead immediately after the crash. One of the child was seriously injured. He had an ankle fracture, and he could drag out his rest of his 3 children from the plane. But what happened in the next around 1 day to the next 1 week, the management of those children made Dr. Steiner understand that there was something wrong in the system. Unlike that of what many people would have done, he did not go to the press or the media to complain about that what was the health system. He did the unthinkable effort. He changed the health system as such. And if you have seen in your MBBS days, you have known something called as an ABC of trauma. However, as of 2011, things have gradually been a little changed, in which catastrophic bleeding has come a technically little in front of the sea. And it is strongly recommended that all of you who are involved in care of trauma patients, it is strongly recommended that if you have not done an ATLS, please do an ATLS course to train yourself in trauma. So this is an humble request from all of us. Now, as I have said, today's talk is all about penetrating traumas. Blunt trauma to the abdomen are much more commoner in our daily practice. And in a civilian practice, the majority of the trauma that you see are usually in the form of a compression injury. And majority of the visceras are known to have a direct impact and thereafter the effect. But when you talk about penetrating traumas are of various nature, starting from stab injuries, which are more commoner than other wounds, to gunshot wounds, which are less common in a civilian practice, maybe except the election times. Gunshot wounds technically are much more commoner if you work in a warfield or military practice. Majority of the penetrating traumas that civilians encounter, like you and me, will be confined to stab wounds, may be confined to something called as accidental wounds. Right? Now, what changes between a blunt and a penetrating trauma? Because the next 10 minutes, before we jump on to organs like stomach, duodenum, and pancreas, it is good enough to know what are the things that are little changed between both of them. In a patient with a blunt trauma, the bad about a blunt trauma is that blunt traumas will always be your guesswork. Like you do not know what exactly organs will be, and you can only guess according to the mechanism of trauma in upper abdomen, lower abdomen, the black and the flank, that what has been the one point. However, in a penetrating trauma, now these pictures look very dramatic. The things are not exactly the same. These kind of injuries are technically called as evisceration, and these kind of injuries are responsible for producing a mesenteric and intestinal injury. And you know that you know the culprit. If you think about a stab injuries, which are the more commoner in our practice, the stab injuries are more or less with a known length of the knife, and you know what are the organs that are going to come into this way. Whereas when you talk about a special kind of injury called as an impalement injury, now the main thing is that beyond these injuries being dramatic and very favorite to news reporters, for you and me as surgeons, the main technical considerations are not to take the rod or that stick out and to do it only under a controlled atmosphere. Number two, to take these patients to the operation theater and to intubate them sometimes is a big challenge. So these kind of injuries, like the last three, this one, and these ones, will always require a laparotomy. So please remember them because we are required to come to these areas. Whereas on the other hand, when you talk about a gunshot wounds, and gunshot wounds, the major point are 2 points. One, if you have known about the wound of entrance, this is always something that we get to look. Always do not look only at the entrance. Always look at what has been the trajectory of the bullet, or maybe the bullet has hit there and then the bullet came there. And in the pathways, say between the road A, road B, and the road C, there has been an umpteen number of organs that are injured. So what is always an important part before you jump on to talk about stomach and pancreas is always know what is the track of the bullet. Now, if you are wondering, sir, why should I know the track of the bullet? The basic story is very simple. When a bullet hits, this area that produces is called as a cavitation. Whereas, if this is something called as a primary cavitation, the one that produces around this effect is technically called as the secondary cavitation. So secondary cavitations will always be, so if you consider that this is the liver, that means the rest of the injuries in the secondary cavitation will be in a diameter that varies according to the velocity of the bullet. So in a stab injury, the consideration is not that. However, in a patient with a gunshot, do not only look at that organ, look at side organs also. Now, coming to the straight point and then straight to the job. Do all penetrating injuries, that means you have talked about two kinds of penetrating injuries, gunshots, which motivate you to look into that video once again, and stab injuries and impalement rods and evisceration. When do they need a laparotomy? The answer is in the 1960s, 70s, even somewhat in 80s, all penetrating injuries would have needed a laparotomy. The answer for this is, do all penetrating injuries need a laparotomy? We have came from this evolution, and all penetrating injuries technically do not need a laparotomy. You only need laparotomies in 1, 2, 3, 4. Unstable patients, peritonitis, evisceration, and impalement. Now, before we talk about the rest of abdomen injuries, for all technical considerations, if you talk about the abdomen technically is an area which extends from the nipple line to the mid-thigh. So if you are thinking, yes, that big part is the abdomen. However, in a patient with a abdominal injury, in a penetrating injury, we divide the abdomen very grossly into 3 zones. One, there the anterior abdominal wall that extends from the xiphoid to the symphysis pubis. Number 2, the lateral abdominal wall, and particularly that extends from the mid-axillary line to the scapular line. And finally, the main interest for today is a thoracoabdominal region, which technically extends from the area of umbilicus to the nipple line in the transversely. If you make the mid-axillary line, if you make the mid-clavicular lines along with the nipple lines, and then you have the epigastric or the transpyloric line, this area bounded by the 2 mid-clavicular lines are technically called as the box of death. And any injuries in this region, always think of a cardiac injury and a pericardial tamponade as the main point. So these kind of injuries, thereafter the main disadvantage of this kind of injuries are this. Now, when you talk about an anterior abdominal wall, and when you talk about what happens to the anterior abdominal wall, remember that the algorithms for an anterior abdominal wall are more or the less very straightforward done. And we have had more or the less an idea about what is going to happen in this. Just few take-home points to know what we should be maintaining in a case of an anterior abdominal wall. Any patient who comes, always go for the primary survey, and any primary survey is airway, breathing, circulation, disability limitation, exposure, and fluids. Then after this, when you have stabilized the patient, you have done the basic radiology, and then you need to understand 2 points together. Does the patient need immediate laparotomy? I have told you what are the indications of an immediate laparotomy. Then those 1, 2, 3, 4 indications are complete. Take the patient to the operation theatre. Now, in a patient, if the stab wounds are anterior, remember that the patient is hemodynamically stable. The patient has no evidence of peritonitis, because if the patient had peritonitis, if you had taken the patient to the operation theatre, the road is very simple. Hemodynamically unstable, the road is simple. Evisceration, the road is simple. Impalement, the road is simple. And question mark, gunshot wounds, the road is simple. When you talk about hemodynamically stable patients with no peritonitis, there is now 2 options to do. One, you can go in for an wound exploration under local anesthesia, which has been shown to be much better than doing a CT scan of the abdomen to see the tract. Particularly, remember, we are talking stab injuries, because gunshot wounds will require us to think about a laparotomy. Now, in a local exploration or the wound, if there is a peritoneal breach, it is safe to presume there may be an organ injury, and it is in good habit to perform a laparotomy or a laparoscopy in these cases. Because with the guidelines that we are going to see at the end, things are gradually changing up in this manner. When you talk about the posterior region or the flank, always remember that put in a Foley catheter and try to obtain a triple contrast CT. Now, what do you mean by triple contrast CT? IV contrast, nasogastric tube or oral contrast. That means NG tube or oral contrast. And finally, rectal contrast. This CT is the important story that you must remember in posterior flank and this. When you come to the thoraco-abdominal region, as I have said, there is both chance of a chest injury which can kill the patient, and there is both chance of an abdominal injury which can be very dangerous. Now, in this group, it is always important to take an chest X-ray and then consider doing a FAST and an erect chest X-ray. So understand that one, the fast and the erect chest X-ray. Now, if you have done the fast and the erect chest X-ray, please understand the algorithm rather than think only of that organ. There could be 4 possibilities in front of us. The fast means unfast ultrasound. Now, if the chest X-ray is negative, nothing bad. Fast is negative, nothing bad. The question is, do you suspect an injury to the diaphragm? If the answer to your question is yes, then you can consider a diagnostic peritoneal lavage, a CT scan, or even a diag lab. Now, studies differ according to what is good. CT and DPL have been studied. Diagnostic laparoscopy has not been studied. If it is no, then observe the patient. If the chest X-ray is negative, but the fast is positive, then either consider a laparotomy. However, in the modern practice, hemodynamically stable patient, you can consider a laparoscopy. Okay. If the chest X-ray is positive, but fast is negative, you can consider for a thoracoscopy, or if you do not have the resources, better think about a thoracotomy. A CT will not be a great idea in this one. If the chest X-ray is positive and fast is positive, insert an ICD immediately and then consider a laparotomy. So please remember this simple algorithm. This algorithm has been proposed by the Western Association for Trauma algorithm. We'll talk about that at the end of the class. Now, I have talked about something called FAST, CT scans, and diagnostic peritoneal lavage. All these 3 modalities, they have a maximum sensitivities of about 70% only. Now, how specific they are for injuries will again vary between 50 to 90%, because in a penetrating trauma, pneumoperitoneum is not as useful as a sign as would be if it was a patient with a blunt trauma. However, what has come up in the last 15 years is laparoscopy is still debated, and people have really thought about that there are many caveats, including not seeing the retroperitoneum, but laparoscopy is good in seeing the diaphragm. Laparoscopy is good in telling you organ injuries, particularly in the mesentery, if they can show the mesentery. But diaphragm, yes, it's a good modality. What has come up also in a big way is something called a sequential clinical evaluation. That means you see the patient, the same team, or the findings are relayed, and this is done with the same clinical expertise by the same team, and it has been shown that this is equal to, if not better than, a CT scan or an ultrasound or a diagnostic peritoneal lavage. Now, so let us have a quick recap before we talk again of organs. When we do laparotomy, unstable patients hemodynamically, evidence of peritonitis, evisceration, impalement. Now, the problem with peritonitis is that peritonitis sometimes is a subjective assessment. Hence, people have thought that about these 3 are always the gold standard indication. Peritonitis sometimes is a little debated, but still we should. when not to do a laparotomy? Now, this comes as a big question. Remember that when not to do a laparotomy depends upon, as I have said, if you have patients who are hemodynamically stable, if you have patients with no signs of peritonitis, if you have patients particularly in the anterior abdominal wall where local wound exploration has shown you that there is no breach in the posterior fascia or the peritoneum, this is a group that can be observed. Please remember that. We are going to observe this group. The last studies have shown us that one. If you talk about the role of a CT scan role, again, as I've told you, is a little difficult one. But remember that CT scan can tell you if it is up till the fat, the stab knife tract, then you can observe. If it is up to the muscle, then have a rigid serial clinical observation, and these patients can be discharged. These patients are not discharged. Whereas if it is in the peritoneal cavity, the tract tells you that it is in the peritoneal cavity, maybe with a pneumoperitoneum, maybe with a free fluid, this group should be considered for a laparoscopy, at least, if not a laparotomy, to have the benefit of doubt. Now, as I've said, I'm a little more towards the laparoscopic side. Laparoscopic surgeons have tried to propose their own algorithm, but again, they are difficult, except maybe for the diaphragm. Except maybe for the diaphragm, that you have an idea. Now, after around 25 minutes, if I am successful in making you understand the algorithm, probably I have done my job. Because rest of the injuries are, as they come by, we think about what should be done. Now, when I talk about the diaphragm, remember that the main issues in the diagnosis of a diaphragmatic injuries in a penetrating injury are always, remember, in the upper part of the abdomen that is bounded by the supra-umbilical line. We are not taking the transpyloric line, and the level of the nipples. If there is any injuries, and please think of the diaphragm always to be the organ that will be involved. Now, how do you know that there is a diaphragmatic injury? As I have said, things are not so easy to diagnose a diaphragm injury. Particularly, initial chest X-rays or even a CT may not be that accurate. But if you feel the trajectory of the bullet or the trajectory of the knife are all essential, then it is, and if you do not have any clinical signs, then it is essential to do at least a laparoscopy. As I've told you, this is one organ or one region where laparoscopy has been shown to be very useful. And in the role of laparoscopy in this point, this is a good point to do. Now, if there is a diaphragmatic tear, then what should be done with this diaphragmatic tear? Now, points to remember in the diaphragmatic injuries are, remember that injuries on the right side are more difficult to manage because the phrenic nerve is very close to this point. Injuries on the left are a little easier because the phrenic nerve is above the diaphragm. The only point of contention in all of this is that if you have these injuries, then you will definitely need an intercostal chest drain. But along with that, what is important is that you need to put a horizontal mattress. So if this is the injury, always know that you need to put a horizontal mattress suture with a non-absorbable like a Prolene. Giving a stitch like this is not a recommended one because it is going to make a cut through. Always tell the patient there could be a remote chance of a phrenic nerve entrapment or even a phrenic nerve palsy on that side. So always keep note of this kind of injuries which can happen with the diaphragm. Diaphragm injuries are notorious for a delayed presentation. If you have a patient with a penetrating injury, please keep a note of that one. Now talk about the stomach. The stomach is said to be one among the most common organs injured, but it is usually not. But if the patient has a stab injury in a full stomach, it will be involved. Now, the major part of diagnosis of stomach injuries are difficult. So the only hint that you will get is a nasogastric tube aspirate that contains blood. But this is a very difficult proposition because nasogastric tubes containing blood could be coming from the esophagus, could be coming from the duodenum, could be coming from the stomach, but at least it gives you a hint that the stomach may have been the organ that is injured. Point number one. Point number two, the basic treatment of any stomach injuries which are associated with peritonitis is again we'll go for a laparotomy, and laparoscopy in these ones are very notorious in missing out posterior wall injury. Always remember that. Do not depend upon laparoscopy to show you the posterior part of the stomach. It cannot. So if you're thinking of an anterior part of the stomach, please always do a laparoscopy. Do a good palpation of the stomach and always go in for entry into the lesser sac. And when you enter the lesser sac, always remember, follow the trajectory of the knife or the bullet and see what are the structures that are behind the stomach that could have been injured. We once had a patient with an arrow injury. The arrow was like this, and that arrow had an injury to the anterior wall of the stomach. Now, someone intelligent took out the arrow before he put in the patient to laparotomy. We lost the patient, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm not really telling you this one with no purpose. Do you know the reason we lost? We did not contemplate that the arrow would be going and injuring the posterior wall of the stomach. We lost the patient because it formed a retrogastric collection, and what it did was that it injured the pancreatic duct. And at autopsy, we found that, oh my God, there was a big pancreatic leak and we could not understand. We thought about many complications, but in reality, if you had opened the lesser sac, palpated the course of the knife and the aorta and the vena cava, things would have been simple. Esophageal injuries are one among those cursed injuries that any surgeon who faces them really knows how bad they are. The only points to remember in these ones are, please be on a high alert, particularly injuries near the diaphragm, which will make you know what is an esophageal injury. Esophageal injuries, like penetrating injuries, as I have said, consider this to be a Borhave's esophagus with a double dhamaka. A Borhave is one wall, that means one circumference will rupture. In a gunshot injuries of the esophagus or stab injuries, the patient has an injury in both the walls. Now, the only point that we should always remember is that always use a delayed absorbable suture, preferably a PDS, to oppose the margins, number one. Number two, always take a few seromuscular sutures from the esophagus and then try to make something called as a mucosal or a stomach, not mucosal, sorry, a stomach serosal patch, commonly called as a Thal patch. And the Thal patch, remember, is done. If you are trained to do a fundoplication, which is a very, very, very difficult job in a trauma patient, the surgeon really has a high adrenaline rush, and fundoplications are not an easy job to do. Number one. Number two is that it needs a training. It needs an bougie in the esophagus. There are many difficult terrains. What you can also do is that this is the diaphragmatic cruda, and you can take little amount of a peritoneal flap down here, and this peritoneal flap can come. That means it is just only, ladies and gentlemen, to just cover this area. You are trying to use something that is near your hands. People have taken the fat around these areas, which is in this fundoplication world, are technically called as the Belsey pad of fat. And these areas or these things are used to do the coverage, number one. Number two, if you think the vagus is injured, then Keep a note, it is better to think about making a small gastrotomy or doing a pyloroplasty. So rather than do a gastrotomy, I think I'll be doing a pyloroplasty. If you feel the vagus is injured and if you could identify the vagal injury, but it is always mandatory, do a feeding jejunostomy. Always do a feeding jejunostomy because these injuries have more than 50% chance of a leak, and leak is a bad one. And so please do a feeding jejunostomy. It is preferable to do an intercostal drainage also because sometimes collections can go up. Some people think about doing a crudopexy, which is not exactly a very advisable thing. So this is all about the esophageal injuries. Now, if you think about the duodenum and the pancreas, these injuries are one among the most dangerous ones. Number one, because not only of the magnitude of the trauma, but in a gunshot or a stab wound, the main problem is their identification. So if you are a surgeon and if you have had a patient with a duodenal injury, the first basic challenge, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, is to know where is the injury. It takes maybe an hour to find out where is that small rent in the third part of duodenum. So if you know how to see a CT scan, if your patient did have a CT scan, because out of the modalities, laparoscopy, you cannot see the duodenum. FAST is an ultrasound, not informative. DPLs are difficult to do, not informative. So the only help that we have in a patient with no peritonitis, hemodynamically stable, is a CT. Now in the CT, I think you have this thing in your screens now. Learn to see them very quickly. This is a CT of the upper abdomen, and when you think about a CT in a trauma, try to go for at least an IV contrast. And if your trajectory demands that there is an injury to the duodenum, use an upper GI contrast. Like this one is the stomach. So the stomach has been filled up with a dye. The structure that I am going to show you now is the splenic vein. This area is the pancreas. So if there is a pancreas injury, you know how to know that. Remember that this is the aorta. The vena cava in the upper abdomen is a little high up, and this one is the vena cava. Now, if there are injuries in this region, what is always important for everyone to understand is that know the arterial anatomy, what you are expected to see, and then think about what are the other areas in the retroperitoneum that are containing gas or retroperitoneum containing fluid, which will indicate that if this is a stab injury, which is coming like this, so think about the knife, then think about beyond the stomach that has been injured, what are the other organs that could be injured? Now, so if you now go a little down in the CT, always come to the level of the gallbladder. This is the liver, and now identify that if this is the aorta, now we are a little down and hence it is easy for us to identify. This is the vena cava. What is very important is identify that there is one part of the intestine which is lying technically transverse to this. Now this kind of bowel which opacifies with this dye, and you can see the two kidneys, and at the level of the right renal hilum is technically something called as the third part of the duodenum. So this one that I have highlighted for all of you is technically called as the duodenal third part. So this is the third part of the duodenum. Always, as I have said, look for any evidence of gas in the retroperitoneum, because third part of duodenum is partly covered by peritoneum, mostly retroperitoneal. How does the gas look like? Sir, this is a gas. Gas is black. Bones are white. So look into gas in this part, which gives you a hint that yes, there has been an injury to the duodenum. Now, if there is an injury to the duodenum, then what to do? That is a real problem because evolution has happened in a big way. If you think about the Second World War and after that, when people thought about the Vietnam War, because wars teach us what to do in injuries, the first of the procedures that started was something called as a duodenal diverticulization. Now, duodenal diverticulization was a big procedure. People did this with not a very good outcome. And what if you understand the philosophy of this operation? The procedure that was done was that if this is the gallbladder and the bile duct, and this is entering into the pancreas, this was done technically for injuries in the first part, the second part, the third part, maybe even the fourth part. Now, what was done in these injuries? The first thing that was done was people did a distal gastrectomy and closed the duodenal stump. So if I have an eraser with me, sir, this is the first part of the procedure. So they did a distal part of the gastrectomy, and this was a part of the stomach that was open. It was closed. So if you have done this, definitely logic says you need a gastrojejunostomy to be done. You say, okay, very nice, sir. The food now can go in this way. You say, okay, very happy. The food is going through this way. Now what? Now the next point. Let us do a cholecystectomy. You are surgeons. You say, oh my God, gallbladder made this organ for surgeons. The gallbladder is out, cholecystectomy. So this is the gallbladder. Gallbladder is unhappy. Now, what is the next thing to do? The next thing to do is that let us put in a T-tube. Why T-tube? Because the bile is diverted. And if the duodenal injuries which have been closed, if they are under tension, you can do and duodenal T-tube also, the duodenal tube also, because you know that this is the ampulla, all the pancreatic juice is going to come through this point. People can add and feeding jejunostomy, maybe, but this was in a very simple way, something called as duodenal diverticulization, which had approximately a 20 to 30% 30-day mortality. Probably the only reason for mortality is not the technique. The problem is the duration of the operation that was so great. So people understood that something has to be changed, ladies and gentlemen. And then they came up with an evolution of something called as a 3-tube technique. Now in this 3-tube technique, what came up was, understand this one, not difficult one. 3-tube techniques were mostly popular after the Vietnam War, when stab injuries and pellet injuries and shotgun injuries were on the rise. So if this is the injury to the duodenum, first of all, close the injury, okay, right? And then 3 tubes, I'll take 3 colors for all of us. First of all, I will give a tube in the duodenum. This first tube or tube number 1 is known to divert the bile and the pancreatic juice. Now talk about the next of the tubes. What we'll do is that we'll make around 10 centimeters from the ligament of Treats. We will insert a tube up till the second part, and this is called as a tube number 2, which will decompress the duodenum. And now let us talk about the final tube, which is something which will be again at a distance of about 10 centimeters. We will do something called as a feeding jejunostomy. There are differences or opinions about what should be done, but these are the 3 tubes which were shown to have a good idea about this procedure. Then people came up with the last one called as a pyloric exclusion, particularly after the Gulf War this started. And this was technically something that revolutionized the way we looked into these points. Simple. People said that, so number 1, close these injuries and open the anterior wall of the stomach, take a Babcock, and then hold the pylorus, take interrupted sutures, maybe with a Vicryl, maybe with a Prolene, because whatever you do, it is going to shed off. The level of the bite should be in the submucosa. That means, simple word, close the pylorus. Okay. And after you have closed the pylorus, do a formal anterior gastrojejunostomy. Do not worry about the pylorus. The stitches are going to get auto-resolved by 4 to 6 weeks. And it is hoped that placing a big drain by this side should make, if there is a controlled fistula, let it happen. But at that time, our advantage is that I can feed the patient. That's it. So this is all about pyloric exclusion, which is now the standard of care that we follow for this. So I let it have 5-star marking now. Pancreas management, believe me, is much more difficult because of the underestimate that we do for how pancreatic injuries can do. We will not be talking, don't get afraid that I will be talking you about the grades. The basic story is very simple. If it is something that is behind the portal vein, remember that if it is something behind the portal vein, that is the neck of the pancreas. If there are injuries in the body tail region and these injuries have injured the duct is injured, you can have two options to do. You can do a distal pancreatectomy plus minus the splenectomy, whatever is faster, or what you can do is that you can put in a T-tube in the pancreas. You feel that, oh my God, what is he saying? And then just come out and let it make a fistula. Provided that the head of the pancreas is draining adequately, you need not worry. If there is no ductal injury, do not unnecessarily poke around the pancreas. Whatever tissue needs to be debrided, debride, and please put in a drain and please come out. Do not fool around with the pancreas. If there are injuries in the head, then things are really very bad. These injuries are technically a grade 4 or a grade 5 injuries, and please do not think about doing Whipples on that day. You are not technically mentally geared up to do that Whipples on that day. Please put in a drain, come out, do a damage control surgery, take up the patient at 48 hours to the theatre, and then with a trained team, think about doing a pancreatic duodenectomy. But do not do it on that day. Studies have shown this to be the better approach rather than doing it that day. Finally, coming to the retroperitoneum, and our talk gradually ends. Injuries in the upper abdomen, upper GI tract will be incomplete if I do not speak of retroperitoneum, which is technically the zone that surgeons are blind. And I'm not really joking. Surgeons are blind. We underestimate the retroperitoneum. We fear something that we never know, ladies and gentlemen. Things that we do not know, we fear. And fear makes us close our eyes like an ostrich. And hence, it is better to open our eyes and to understand there are multiple bad things that can happen in the retroperitoneum, and patients will die because of ignorance maybe. So if you think over with the retroperitoneum technically for a trauma patient has 3 zones. I will be taking my color pens to shed. If I am till the medial end of the kidneys and till the medial end of another kidney, till the bifurcation or the sacral promontory, this area, I told you the kidney to the kidney, medial end of the kidney to the kidney, this area that I have shaded in front of you, if you get to see any hematoma in this region, please explore the hematoma. If you think you are not trained to explore the hematoma, please call in someone who can explore the hematoma. That means, why am I so worried that in a zone 1, I need this hematoma to be explored? If you look at what are the organs in concern, you say, oh my God, it is all the king, the queen, the knight of these areas. The aorta is there, the vena cava is there, the duodenum is there, the pancreas is there. They're all the VIPs, the mantris in this area. So if a mantri gets caught, definitely you need to rescue that mantri. So these are all about this part. So please remember, all zone 1 hematomas must be explored. Please do not make any algorithm that they are expanding, hence I will explore, non-expanding, I will not explore. Zone 1 hematoma, aapko explore karna hai. That is all simple. If you do not know how to take a vascular control, call someone who will. But you have to explore. Number 1, the zone 2 hematomas, understand, start from the kidneys, includes the 2 colon up till the pelvic brim. So in an operative field, definitely we talk about the reflections of the colon, and it starts from the iliac crest up into this. Now these zones are usually a good zone, and hematomas in this zone can be observed provided you have ruled it out on a CT scan or maybe an imaging that there is no injury to the colon or the duodenum. So the duodenum on the right and the colon on the sides, if you see there is any presence of any extra luminal air, like a retroperitoneal air, you may go for a conservative management with a zone 2. Kidney injuries, when managed like this, may lead to formation of an urinoma, which may be tackled later on. But in a penetrating injuries, beware. The last of the points, if you think about anything below the pelvic brim, that is a zone 3. And the main thing in a zone 3 always, before you think about doing anything, is my algorithm is very simple, sir. Please palpate the femoral artery. If the femoral artery is palpable and the patient has pulse, that simply means that the iliac arteries are working nicely. Number 2, now catheterize urinary bladder, which is always in place. Number 3, now if you think the patient is stable and your CT scans has ruled out a bowel injury, the hematoma is non-expanding, you can observe. However, if the hematoma is expanding in a zone 3 or there is loss of pulse, that technically means something is bad. You can either take a vascular help or you can explore. So the main common point is zone 1, always explore. Zone 2, observe, explore when required. Zone 3, take a guard, see the hematoma size, see the pulses. As I've said, if you have done a CT scan for whatever reason, I will try to shade this for all of you. If I take this color, remember that anything that I have said from the medial end of the kidneys will be a zone 1. If I take this color, sir, this will be a zone 2. And finally, anything below the level of the pelvic brim, remember, will be a zone 3. So if you remember this very simply, the simple quiz question for all of you is, which zone hematoma is this? Zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3? I will not be telling you this one. At the end of the class, I will be asking you once again, or this one. I think pictures are very clear enough. You can identify which zone hematoma is this. Zone 1, zone 2, or zone 3. We have completed this brief topic. What I will like to show you is, because guidelines, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I find that in the sea of ignorance that we live in, I do not know how many of you are fans of Lighthouse. Well, I like lighthouses much. And this lighthouse phenomenon that I say, this light that comes out of the lighthouse are exactly these guidelines. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to make you understand how to look for a good guideline. But it is strongly recommended that you should do the ATLS course. If you are a trauma surgeon, it is mandatory that you do this course. So before I end, then I think what I will be showing you is how to see for a guideline called as EAST guidelines. Now see, if I go to the Google and if you type something called as an EAST guidelines, then what comes out is usually this page. And if you go to their web page, this is a free site. And all that we know in the trauma is from this association. I think you can see the name called as Eastern Association for Surgery of Trauma. This is a free site for all of us, which gives us not only in trauma, but also other emergencies of our surgical interest. So it is good that you should see this site, particularly if you are thinking about any confusions. And then more or less, they will give you all, say, simple guidelines. Example, say what happens to diaphragmatic injury evaluation and management. These are all simple free things that you can get. It is good that they have made algorithms for all of you, and this is what we do. So with this, as we come to the end, now what is to be remembered from today's class? I have a couple of minutes with me, and then I will be ending the class within 1 to 2 minutes. So if you think about what are the things that we should know then. If you have a patient with a anterior abdominal wall penetrating trauma, what happens if you have a patient with an anterior abdominal wall penetrating trauma or a stab injuries to talk about? If it is a gunshot wounds, I will go for a laparotomy. If it is a stab injury, I will see two factors. If there is a shock, if there is an evisceration, if there is a peritonitis, and if there is an impalement. If these are there, the patient goes in for a laparotomy. Laparotomy means LAPRATOMY, not laparoscopy. If these are not present, then you can go for a local wound exploration. Okay. And with the local wound exploration, or you can combine a CT scan. FAST is a debatable indication. And if this is showing a peritoneal breach, then remember that this patient goes in for a laparotomy or a laparoscopy. Okay. If there is no peritoneal breach, then you can observe the patients. Definitely, these algorithms are much more complex that I have had, but this is as for today that you are required to know this. With this, I will be ending my talk with only one word. If you have seen expert surgeons and your teachers in practice and their decision taking has been in advanced, remember that they have done that with years of practice and with years of training. Whatever they have done is not so easy that it seems. So it is better that we follow guidelines. We take our time to understand patients, particularly with penetrating injuries, which are sometimes very tricky to manage. With this, thank you everyone. I'd really like to thank Professor Makhan Lal Shah and the Academia of Demar Bangur for this opportunity to come in front of you. Your questions and queries, please.
Yeah, Ramanuj, thank you very much for the nice presentation with animation and your unique presentation. So we have covered almost all upper ear injuries, including the retroperitoneal injuries. So I think the students should understand that for exam purpose, they should have some outline for writing the answers. So if it is suppose a gastric injury or duodenal injury, so in that case, they should come up with a mechanism of injury, then grades of injury, presentation,
Yes,
diagnosis,
sir, I didn't,
and the management.
Sir, I did not talk about the grades because grades will take a long time.
That is there in the book. No problem.
Okay.
They can read. Okay. So this is the usual way one should approach, and it is better that one go by putting some arrows and algorithm for this management. So 10 marks question answer is not a very exhaustive answer. You should spend a few broad headings for writing these answers. So Ramanuj has done a very good job. So I do not find any question in the chat box. What? Segment 7, liver injury with disruption of IHBR with right of injury. How to approach?
Segment 7, liver injury. Sir,
7 is a more posterior injury.
See, segment 7 liver injury, that means if you think about that, let me think about, if this is the gallbladder and then gallbladder is 4B and 5, 6, 7, 8, that means you are talking of an injury in this area. Now, if you think about that this is an gunshot wounds, definitely I will always think over segment 7 injuries for me will always mean I'm injured, I'm worried about the diaphragmatic injury, I am worried about the injury to the lung, and these patients will always have an ICD in place to start the day with. The blood in the thorax will kill the patient. The liver injury is not going to kill the patient. Now, if you are thinking about this to be a penetrating injury, think over what is the trajectory. Like this, which is very bad because you are going to hit the pericardium. Like this, very bad because we are going to hit the aorta. Or like this, which is not bad because you are going to hit the ribs and the parietes. Segment 7 liver injuries as such are not a bad one. If you are thinking of a rupture of the intrahepatic biliary radicals, it is going to produce a bilioma maximum, and the bilioma will require you to drain. And after the drain has been in place for about a month, let a liver surgeon look at it, and whatever he feels, if you are thinking of a resection of a segment, maybe then that he will plan. But that is not an immediate life-threatening issue. Sir, done.
Address the diaphragmatic injury also. If there is a
Yes.
diaphragmatic injury, that has to be addressed either by laparotomy or laparoscopy.
Laparoscopy.
Yeah. So, thank you very much, Dr.
Thank you, sir.
For the nice
Thank you, sir.
presentation. So,
thank you for the opportunity, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.